had worked in a cigarette factory before marriage, gave Padre 8 sons and 3 daughters. Padre saw no need to send his children to school. As far as he was concerned, learning to dance was the only education they required. As soon as they were ready, the sisters, Gracia, Carmelia, and Elisa, joined Padre's act. But on tour in Latin America, the 2 eldest, Gracia and Carmelia, contracted a fever and died. When he returned broken-hearted to Spain, Padre retired from the stage to teach dance, first in Barcelona and later in Madrid. Meanwhile, Elisa was paired in a new act with the eldest son, Eduardo. Although at first he bitterly protested that he wanted to be a bullfighter, not a dancer, before long it was evident that Eduardo and Elisa might make the best dancing cansinos yet. Their career was interrupted, however, when Elisa became pregnant out of wedlock. In 1911, at the age of 17, she gave birth to a son, Gabriel Cansino. Elisa temporarily left her baby in Spain when, in January 1913, she and Eduardo crossed the Atlantic to perform in the United States. When the SS Prince Friedrich Wilhelm docked in New York Harbor, after a 10-day voyage from Cherbourg, France, Eduardo was 17 and Elisa 19. The customs officer noted that Eduardo was 5 feet 6 inches tall and Elisa was 5 feet 5, and both had black hair and eyes. Through an interpreter, they indicated that this would be their first visit to the United States, that they were both unmarried, and that between them they had the equivalent of only $20. In the beginning, they danced at Crossways, the Newport, Rhode Island mansion of leading society hostess Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish, whose husband was the son of Ulysses S. Grant's Secretary of State, and a descendant of the Livingston, Schuyler, De Peyster, Beekman, and Stuyvesant families. Mamie Fish liked to entertain in the grand style, and was constantly on the lookout for new and exotic acts to amuse and startle her guests. Her insatiable appetite for the unusual had led her to engage a long list of assorted clairvoyants, oriental dancers, opera divas, a monkey billed as Prince del Drago, and now the dancing cansinos, with whom she hoped to rekindle some of the excitement that the Spanish dancers Carmencita and Caroline Otero had brought to America before the turn of the century. Eduardo and Elisa's triumphant private performances at Crossways quickly led to a series of vaudeville bookings in New York, where they perfected a brisk, precisely timed 8-minute act, consisting of 3 sinewy Spanish dances, plus the surprise or wow finish of a fast-paced American number. With an eye toward their prospective audience, they also shrewdly Americanized their look, by adopting costumes that were closer to evening clothes than to the traditional dancer's garb they had brought with them from Spain. Although silent films were already beginning to encroach upon its appeal, vaudeville clearly dominated American entertainment during the first quarter of the 20th century. Modern vaudeville had its roots in the beer hall bawdy shows, popular with American men in cities and frontier settlements prior to the Civil War. But by the 1880s, through the efforts of the first vaudeville impresario, Tony Pastor, who banished coarseness and vulgarity in favor of wholesome family entertainment, the straight, clean variety show, consisting of 8 to 15 short contrasting acts, had caught on wildly with the American public. The dancing cansinos arrived in America just in time to cash in on vaudeville's halcyon days, when as many as 2,000 vaudeville theaters dotted the continent, and the biggest box office draws commanded top salaries, like Lillian Russell's weekly $3,150, or Al Jolson's $2,000. Despite their recent success in fashionable Newport, as newcomers Eduardo and Elisa were inevitably relegated to perform the opening act, the doormat of vaudeville, which Fred Astaire later called the most dreaded spot on the bill, because of the grating distractions of late arrivals. By the time all the latecomers had found their seats and the audience had finally settled in, the brief opening number might be over, which was why the first spot was so often filled with wordless or dumb acts, acrobats, jugglers, trained animals, or dancers. Such, initially, was the fate of the dancing cansinos. But contrary to audience expectations that, As the least prestigious of acts, the opener might be pretty bad. The graceful Spaniards made a powerful impression from the first. For an opening number, Eduardo and Elisa Cancino more than made good, noted an early review in 1914 when they did their turn at the Alhambra Theater in Harlem. All of their dances were finely executed, and in a later spot on any bill, this act ought to prove a clean-up. And clean-up they did, when in 1915 the impresario Martin Beck engaged them as vaudeville headliners, the most important act on the bill, at a weekly salary of $1,500. Living out of traveling trunks in far-flung cities across America, they appeared with the motley likes of Toots Packa and her troupe of native Hawaiian singers and instrumentalists, a world-renowned act staged upon a magnificent scale, and Australian woodchoppers, champion axemen of the world, and Miyako sisters, tiny Japanese girls who performed feats of hand-balancing and contortion while singing ragtime in broken English. But invariably, it was the dancing Cancinos who enjoyed the greatest success with audiences and critics alike. They offer a series of native, classical, and ultra-modern dances, in the execution of which they have swept American audiences off their feet, said the Houston Post in 1915. And in Los Angeles, the Examiner noted that both have to the last degree the Spanish wickedness of grace and lithe sensuousness of expression. The pair dances with the abandon of the race, declared the Toledo Blade, but there is poetic grace in their every movement. Whenever they danced, the Spanish youngsters exuded confidence, and their brashness soon became a popular part of the act. At Hammerstein's Victoria, in New York, which George Jessel would call the most glamorous vaudeville theater in the world, Eduardo and Elisa delighted audiences with a dramatic and well-rehearsed challenge in English to any modern ballroom or fancy dancers, the famous Castles and marvelous Millers included, who might be so bold as to try to top them. Off stage, however, Eduardo knew how to make himself well-liked by fellow performers such as Fred and Adele Astaire. While the dancing Cancinos were headliners, the Astaires were, as Fred recalled, only a minor act on the bill and occupied the number 2 spot. But as was typical of his gregarious personality, Eduardo went out of his way to flatter and encourage them. Vaudevillians knew that they had it made when they were invited to take a flyer into Broadway musical comedy. The often loosely structured musicals of the day enabled leading vaudevillians to do their customary turns while accruing the considerable prestige of appearing in a Broadway show. Thus, by 1916, the dancing Cancinos were making their musical comedy debut in Follow Me, starring Anna Held at the Schubert Brothers Casino Theater. Billed as dancers to the Spanish court, they made a stunning guest appearance in Act 1. For 21-year-old Eduardo, Follow Me would represent far more than just a professional breakthrough. During rehearsals, he became seriously involved with one of the musical's showgirls, a tall, striking 19-year-old named Volga Hayworth. Although she had no particular talent or theatrical training, at the age of 16, Volga had run away from her parents' home on North Capitol Street in Washington, D.C., to pursue a stage career in New York City. Her father, Alan Duran Hayworth, was a native of Terre Haute, Indiana, but had moved to Washington, D.C., where he established a printing business and married the former Maggie O'Hare, a native Washingtonian. Volga was Alan and Maggie's third child, and from the first she had been an outgoing, extroverted girl with a mind and will of her own. Alan expected that someday his daughter would meet a nice local boy and settle down, but Volga had other ideas. When without warning she slipped off to New York, where she appeared briefly as a showgirl in the Ziegfeld Follies, the Hayworths were appalled. But for Alan Hayworth, the worst news was yet to come. Volga quickly decided that she was in love with Eduardo, whose still sparse English only added to the air of foreign mystery that so entirely distinguished him from the humdrum boys she had known in Washington. Stage-struck as she was, she idolized Eduardo for his vaudeville fame and wealth of performing experience, and like many a rebellious teenager before and after, she was by no means discouraged by the certainty of what her father's reaction to Eduardo might be. Early in 1917, when the dancing